In March 1860, Professor Silas Sterling led a 7-person expedition into the uncharted canyons of central Nevada, searching for what Spanish records cryptically called the Stone City of the Red-Haired Giants. The expedition never returned. 100 years later, in 1960, a geological survey team discovered their remains in a remote canyon, 7 bodies arranged in a perfect circle, facing inward, hands positioned as if in final prayer. Beside them lay field notes documenting an extraordinary discovery: a vast burial ground containing skeletal remains of individuals standing 8 to 10 feet tall, buried with sophisticated artifacts that matched no known Native American culture. The notes described elaborate stone structures, mysterious metal objects, and astronomical alignments suggesting advanced knowledge. But most disturbing were the final entries, written in increasingly desperate handwriting, describing something that had trapped them in the canyon. The Sterling expedition's findings were quickly suppressed, their bones reburied, and the canyon's exact location removed from maps. Now, DNA analysis from bone fragments has finally revealed the truth about who these giants were and why powerful institutions wanted them erased from history. The spring of 1860 found America on the brink of civil war, but the Western territories remained focused on more immediate concerns: gold, silver, and the systematic mapping of lands recently acquired from Mexico. Professor Silas Sterling, a geologist and natural historian affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania, had developed an obsession that would ultimately cost him his life, proving that ancient civilizations far more advanced than recognized had existed in the Americas long before currently acknowledged indigenous peoples. Sterling's interest began with his study of Spanish colonial records housed in Mexico City archives. Among routine expedition reports and missionary accounts, he found repeated references to encounters with unusually tall people in remote regions, descriptions of elaborate stone structures in inaccessible canyons, and mentions of giants who guarded sacred places. Most scholars dismissed these as exaggeration or confusion, but Sterling believed they represented suppressed historical truth. In late 1859, Sterling secured private funding from Eastern investors intrigued by his theories. The expedition would investigate specific locations in Nevada territory, where Spanish records suggested ancient settlements might exist. The funding was modest, but sufficient for a small team and 6 months of supplies. Sterling assembled his party carefully, seeking not just competence, but discretion. He knew his theories were controversial and wanted evidence before announcing discoveries. His team included 7 members beyond himself. Dr. Margaret Sullivan served as expedition physician. Unusual for a woman, but Sullivan was a widow with medical training who'd accompanied her late husband on previous expeditions. She brought practical medical knowledge essential for survival in harsh terrain. Timothy O'Brien, an Irish immigrant with surveying experience, would handle map-making and technical measurement. His skills would prove crucial for documenting findings with precision needed for scientific acceptance. Erik Johansen, a Norwegian immigrant and photographer, would create visual records of any discoveries. Photography was relatively new technology in 1860, and field photography presented significant technical challenges. But Johansen had developed portable processing techniques that would allow him to develop plates even in remote locations. His role was critical. Sterling knew that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and photographs would provide documentation beyond mere written descriptions. William Montgomery, a former Army scout with extensive knowledge of Nevada terrain, would guide the expedition and handle logistics. Montgomery had spent years in the region and claimed to know hidden canyons and water sources that didn't appear on any maps. He was taciturn and solitary, but his survival skills made him indispensable. Sterling never fully understood what motivated Montgomery to join. The pay was modest and the risks considerable, but suspected the scout had his own reasons for wanting to explore remote canyons. The remaining 3 team members were support staff, horse handlers and laborers who would manage the pack animals and assist with excavation work if discoveries warranted it. Their names appeared in expedition records, but little else is known about them, suggesting they were simply hired help rather than invested participants in Sterling's quest. The expedition departed from Fort Churchill, Nevada on March 15, 1860, with 6 horses and 3 pack mules carrying supplies estimated for 6 months. They headed southeast into terrain that military maps showed only as blank space marked unexplored. Montgomery claimed to know a route through canyons that would take them to a region where Spanish missionaries had reported unusual ruins. From the beginning, strange occurrences marked their journey. The horses became nervous as they approached certain canyon entrances, refusing to proceed without considerable coaxing. At night, team members reported hearing sounds that didn't match known animals. Low, resonant calls that seemed to echo through the canyons in ways that shouldn't be acoustically possible. Timothy O'Brien's compass behaved erratically in certain locations, spinning uselessly or pointing in directions that clearly weren't north. Sterling documented these anomalies carefully in his field journal, treating them as potentially significant rather than mere curiosities. His scientific training made him skeptical of supernatural explanations, but he recognized that unusual phenomena deserved investigation, regardless of their ultimate explanation. The magnetic anomalies particularly intrigued him, suggesting possible mineral deposits that might explain both the compass problems and perhaps attract human settlement in ancient times. As the expedition penetrated deeper into the Nevada canyons, Sterling's journal entries revealed more about his team members and the discoveries that were beginning to reshape his understanding of American prehistory. The entries showed a scholarly mind, grappling with evidence that challenged everything he'd been taught about the continent's ancient past. One team member, Elias Vance, a horse handler whom Sterling had initially considered merely support staff, revealed an unexpected background. Vance confided to Sterling that he'd grown up in the Appalachian Mountains, where his grandmother had told stories about the Old Ones, tall people who'd lived in the mountains before current inhabitants arrived. As a child, Vance claimed to have seen tracks in mud that were human-shaped, but far larger than any normal person could have made. His grandmother's stories described these beings as neither hostile nor friendly, but simply separate, dwelling in high places and avoiding contact. Sterling initially dismissed these stories as folklore, but Vance's accounts aligned suspiciously well with the Spanish records Sterling had studied. The consistency suggested either that Vance had somehow read Sterling's research, unlikely given Vance's limited literacy, or that separate traditions preserved genuine historical memory of an unusual population that had once inhabited North American uplands. The expedition's first concrete evidence appeared in a side canyon on their 12th day of travel. Eric Johansen spotted petroglyphs, rock carvings, high on a canyon wall. The images depicted human figures, but the proportions were unusual. The carved figures stood significantly taller than animal figures that were clearly identifiable as deer and bighorn sheep. If the scale relationships were accurate, the human figures represented people at least 8 feet tall. More intriguingly, the petroglyphs showed these tall figures engaged in activities suggesting sophisticated culture. They appeared to be constructing buildings, performing what might be ceremonies, and interacting with normal-sized people who were depicted as clearly subordinate or possibly enslaved. The implications were disturbing, suggesting not just unusual height, but social organization, and possibly conflict between populations of different sizes. Later that same day, Margaret Sullivan discovered something that profoundly unsettled the entire team. Caught on a dried thorn bush were several strands of human hair, but the color was unlike anything typically seen in Native American populations. The hair was copper red, fine in texture, and when examined microscopically, showed characteristics matching European rather than Asian-descended populations. Yet the hair's weathered condition and the bush's remote location suggested it had been there for years, predating recent European presence in the region. The hair discovery sparked heated debate within the expedition. Some argued it must be from a European explorer who'd passed through earlier. But Montgomery pointed out that their route had taken them through canyons so remote and difficult that no European expedition could have reached them. The area wasn't just unmapped, it was actively hostile to navigation, requiring intimate knowledge of hidden water sources and passable routes that Montgomery had learned from decades of experience. Timothy O'Brien's surveying work revealed another anomaly that deepened the mystery. His careful measurements showed that certain rock formations in the area displayed magnetic properties far exceeding normal basalt or iron-bearing stone. His compass was virtually useless in some locations, spinning freely or pointing in random directions. These magnetic anomalies created navigation challenges, but also suggested geological peculiarities that might have attracted ancient settlement. Most disturbing were the discoveries that suggested recent presence in areas that should have been completely isolated. In one cave, the expedition found evidence of a campfire that couldn't have been more than a few months old, based on ash condition and the state of partially burned wood. Yet Montgomery insisted no one could have reached this location without his knowledge. There was simply no way to find these hidden canyons without a guide who knew their secrets. One team member, whose name Sterling never fully recorded in his journal, developed an intense fear of proceeding further. This individual, referred to only as Jay, became increasingly agitated as they moved deeper into the canyon system. Jay claimed to sense something wrong about the place, describing feelings of being watched and reporting dreams of tall, shadowy figures that seemed more memory than imagination. Sterling attributed this to psychological stress, but Jay's anxiety proved contagious, creating tension within the group. On their 23rd day of travel, the Sterling expedition made discoveries that transformed their scientific curiosity into something approaching awe and fear. They found the first of what would prove to be many dwelling sites, cave systems that had been extensively modified by human hands, but showed architectural sophistication beyond anything Sterling had expected to find. The cave entrance was positioned high on a canyon wall, accessible only by a precarious climb up a rock face that showed signs of deliberate modification. Handholds had been carved into the stone, but their spacing suggested users with longer reach than normal humans. Inside, the cave extended deep into the mountainside, divided into distinct chambers that suggested specialized uses, living spaces, storage areas, and what might have been ceremonial or religious spaces. Most remarkably, the caves showed evidence of preservation techniques that had kept organic materials intact. The dry Nevada air had naturally mummified several bodies found in deeper chambers. These weren't recent dead, but individuals who'd been preserved for what appeared to be centuries. The preservation was so complete that skin, hair, and even clothing remained recognizable, providing unprecedented insights into an ancient culture. The preserved individuals showed the extraordinary height that Spanish records had described. Even accounting for possible distortion from mummification, Sterling estimated these people had stood 8 to 9 feet tall when alive. Their proportions were human, not distorted or pathological, suggesting they weren't giants in the medical sense, but rather members of a population characterized by exceptional height. The clothing demonstrated sophisticated textile production. The garments were woven from plant fibers, processed with techniques that produced cloth of remarkable quality. Some pieces showed decorative patterns created through complex weaving that required advanced loom technology. The presence of dyes in various colors indicated knowledge of which plants produced color-fast pigments and how to fix them in textiles through mordanting processes. More mysterious were the metal objects found with some burials. These weren't the copper or bronze that some North American peoples had worked, but rather an alloy that Sterling couldn't identify. The metal showed no corrosion, despite apparent antiquity, suggesting composition or treatment that preserved it remarkably well. Some pieces appeared to be tools, others ornamental, but their purposes weren't always obvious. The burial practices revealed spiritual beliefs and elaborate funerary customs. Bodies had been positioned carefully, often facing specific directions, usually south, suggesting astronomical significance. Many were buried in stone coffins carved from single pieces of volcanic rock, demonstrating both stoneworking skill and investment of considerable labor in honoring the dead. The coffin's weight, often exceeding a ton, raised questions about how they'd been moved to their final locations. With many burials were food offerings that had mummified along with the bodies. Dried meat, grain stores, and what appeared to be preserved fruits suggested beliefs about afterlife requiring sustenance. The food types indicated agricultural knowledge beyond simple gathering. Some grains showed selective breeding characteristics, suggesting cultivation rather than wild harvesting. Most intriguingly, several burial chambers contained artifacts suggesting astronomical knowledge. Stone markers with carved symbols appeared to track solar and lunar cycles. One chamber's ceiling had been marked with patterns that might represent star positions. The precision of these astronomical markers suggested systematic observation over extended periods, implying a culture that valued and systematically pursued such knowledge. The expedition found evidence of sudden abandonment. Living areas contained tools, pottery, and personal items left as if inhabitants had departed quickly. Food stores remained partially used. Fires had been left to burn out naturally rather than being deliberately extinguished. The pattern suggested something had forced rapid evacuation, whether threat of attack, environmental catastrophe, or some other crisis remained unclear. Sterling's journal entries from this period showed his growing conviction that they'd discovered evidence of a sophisticated ancient American civilization that mainstream archaeology didn't acknowledge. But his excitement was tempered by increasing concern about his team's deteriorating morale and strange occurrences that seemed to intensify as they explored deeper into the canyon system. The first disappearance occurred on the 31st night of the expedition. Jay, the team member who'd expressed increasing anxiety, was on watch duty. Morning revealed his sleeping role empty, his personal effects untouched, and no sign of struggle or deliberate departure. His tracks led away from camp toward a canyon-side passage, then simply ended at a rock face with no apparent exit or climbing route. The team spent 2 days searching, calling his name, and exploring every passage they could access. They found nothing. No body, no additional tracks, no evidence of what had happened. Montgomery grimly noted that the canyon system included vertical shafts and crevasses where a body might fall and never be recovered. But the lack of any disturbance at the point where tracks ended troubled everyone. Timothy O'Brien made an unsettling discovery during the search. In soft sand near where Jay's tracks had ended, he found other footprints. Human-shaped, but significantly larger than any team member's feet. The prints showed a human walking pattern, but at a scale that suggested someone nearly 9 feet tall. The prints were fresh enough that they must have been made recently, possibly the same night Jay disappeared. The team's morale, already strained, deteriorated sharply. Arguments broke out over whether to continue or retreat. Sterling insisted they were close to making discoveries that would revolutionize understanding of American prehistory. Others argued that Jay's disappearance and the mounting strangeness meant they should leave immediately. The debate consumed 2 days before Sterling's determination and the difficulty of backtracking convinced most to proceed cautiously. A week later, a mysterious illness struck several team members. They developed severe headaches, disorientation, and temporary memory loss. Margaret Sullivan, examining the afflicted, found no clear medical explanation. The symptoms didn't match any disease she knew. Most disturbing was that victims reported gaps in their memories, hours where they couldn't account for their activities or whereabouts. This memory disruption made it impossible to reconstruct what had happened during the affected periods. The expedition's horses, already nervous since entering the canyons, became increasingly difficult to manage. They refused to enter certain areas, pulling against their leads with panic that seemed disproportionate to any visible threat. Eventually, all 6 horses died within a 3-day period, from what Sullivan diagnosed as poisoning. They'd drunk from a water source that contained toxic minerals. But Montgomery pointed out that the horses had drunk from multiple sources without effect, and the timing of all 6 dying in rapid succession seemed unlikely to be coincidental. Without horses, the expedition faced severe logistics problems. They couldn't carry supplies for the return journey while also transporting specimens and artifacts they'd collected. Sterling insisted on caching most supplies and taking only essentials, plus the most significant artifacts. This decision would prove disastrous. The cached supplies were never recovered, and the team found themselves increasingly desperate for food and water. Around this time, team members began finding strange markers. Animal skulls mounted on stakes, positioned at intervals along certain canyon routes. The skulls were arranged in ways that seemed deliberate, possibly warnings or territorial markers. But who had placed them, and why, remained mysterious. The skulls showed no weathering, suggesting recent placement, yet the team had seen no other humans in the area. The strange occurrences culminated when the team discovered a section of canyon where every timepiece stopped working. Pocket watches that had functioned perfectly suddenly froze, showing the exact same time regardless of how long elapsed. Montgomery's compass, already unreliable, spun continuously in this area. The phenomenon seemed localized to a specific section of canyon, and crossing the boundary caused instruments to resume normal function, though watches retained the stopped time. Sterling's journal entries from this period showed a man torn between scientific curiosity and growing recognition that his expedition faced dangers he didn't fully understand. He wrote extensively about the discoveries, but also recorded his concerns about team safety and the increasing difficulty of maintaining morale and cohesion. On what Sterling's journal marked as the 47th day, the expedition made the discovery that would justify Sterling's theories and simultaneously seal their fate. Following a narrow canyon that split from the main channel, they found a concealed entrance, a deliberate gap in rock formations that appeared natural but showed signs of strategic placement to hide what lay beyond. Beyond the entrance, the canyon opened into a vast, hidden valley, a natural amphitheater perhaps 2 miles across, surrounded by sheer cliff walls that made it effectively inaccessible except through the concealed passage they'd found. And throughout this valley, scattered across its floor, and visible even from their elevated vantage point, were hundreds of skeletal remains. The team descended cautiously into the valley. What they found exceeded even Sterling's most ambitious expectations. The remains represented a burial ground of extraordinary scale. Sterling estimated at least 300 to 400 individuals interred there over what must have been many generations. But it was the remains themselves that proved most remarkable. The skeletons showed individuals of exceptional height. Sterling's careful measurements documented heights ranging from 8 to 10 feet, with most clustering around 8.5 to 9 feet. These weren't pathological giants, individuals suffering from pituitary disorders, but rather people whose proportions were normal human proportions, simply scaled larger. Their bone structure suggested exceptional strength, with muscle attachment points that indicated powerful physiques, even accounting for their size. The skulls showed distinctive characteristics that Sterling meticulously documented. The cranial capacity exceeded normal human range, suggesting larger brains proportional to increased body size. Pronounced brow ridges and robust jaw structures gave faces that would have appeared strong and distinctive. Dental characteristics included unusual features. Some individuals showed what Sterling described as double rows of teeth, though this might have referred to retained deciduous teeth alongside adult teeth, a dental anomaly that occurs occasionally in all human populations. Many skeletons wore grave goods that had survived burial remarkably well due to the valley's dry climate. Ornaments of copper and bronze demonstrated metallurgical knowledge. More remarkably, several skeletons wore gold jewelry of exceptional purity and craftsmanship. The gold had been worked into elaborate forms, suggesting both artistic sophistication and access to significant metalworking technology. The weapons found with many burials astonished the expedition. Some were made from knapped obsidian, showing expert stoneworking, but others appeared to be crystal, clear quartz worked to razor sharpness through techniques Sterling couldn't identify. The crystal weapons were beautiful, but also functional, with edges that remained sharp despite being centuries or millennia old. Sterling speculated these weapons might have been ceremonial rather than practical, but their size suggested they'd been designed for individuals with the strength to wield them effectively. Most disturbing to the expedition was evidence suggesting these people had died simultaneously or in rapid succession. Many skeletons showed similar positioning, as if they'd fallen where they stood. Bone analysis showed no signs of violence, no cut marks, no fractures from combat. Sterling theorized some catastrophic event, possibly disease, environmental disaster, or even poisoning, had killed the entire population in a short period. The burial grounds organization suggested complex social structures. Some burials were clearly more elaborate, with larger stone markers, richer grave goods, and more prominent positions. This indicated social stratification, not an egalitarian society, but one with leadership hierarchies and possibly hereditary elite. Sterling found evidence of family groupings, multiple burials in proximity that might represent kinship groups interred together. The valley also contained structures, not intact buildings, but stone foundations showing where dwellings had stood. The foundation scale matched the inhabitant's size, with doorways and room dimensions appropriate for 9-foot-tall occupants. Stoneworking showed sophisticated construction techniques, including fitted blocks that required no mortar, suggesting engineering knowledge comparable to ancient Mediterranean civilizations. Sterling's excitement was palpable in his journal entries. He wrote extensively about the implications, speculating about who these people were, where they'd come from, and what their existence meant for understanding human prehistory. But his joy was tempered by the realization that his team was dangerously undersupplied. The return journey would be difficult, and they needed to document everything quickly before attempting to exit the canyons. Sterling's plan was to document the burial ground extensively, collect representative specimens, and return to civilization to report findings that would revolutionize American archaeology. He was naive about the reception his discoveries would receive, and the powerful interests that would move to suppress evidence threatening established historical narratives. Sterling prepared detailed reports intended for the Smithsonian Institution, carefully documenting measurements, locations, and photographic evidence Eric Johansen had painstakingly created under field conditions. The reports described not just the physical evidence, but Sterling's interpretations, that these remains represented a population of exceptional height that had inhabited the Americas for thousands of years before currently recognized indigenous peoples arrived. These interpretations aligned with theories prevalent among certain scholars, but controversial in academic circles. The 1860s saw intense debate about human origins, evolution, and the peopling of the Americas. Darwin's Origin of Species had been published in 1859, provoking fierce controversy. Sterling's findings threatened to complicate debates further by suggesting human diversity exceeded recognized parameters. Sterling understood his discoveries would be controversial, but believed evidence would overcome skepticism. He carefully packed representative bones, artifacts, and Johansson's photographic plates, creating a collection intended to provide irrefutable proof. The materials were packed into 20 wooden crates, meticulously labeled and inventoried in Stirling's journals. But Stirling never emerged from the canyons to present his findings. What happened to the expedition during their final weeks remains one of American history's most mysterious disappearances. The last dated entry in Stirling's recovered journal was June 18, 1860, recording their decision to begin the return journey. After that, entries became undated, increasingly desperate, and eventually incoherent. The final entries describe being trapped, though Stirling never clarified by what or whom. He wrote about being unable to find the exit canyon despite Montgomery's guidance. He described team members vanishing one by one, reduced to 4, then 3. The final legible entry, written in what appeared to be blood rather than ink, stated simply, "We chose to remain together. Whatever comes, we face it as brothers." 100 years later, in 1960, a geological survey team discovered the expedition's remains in a small side canyon. The 7 bodies were arranged in a circle, facing inward, positioned as if they'd made a deliberate choice to die together rather than separately. The bodies had mummified naturally in the dry environment, preserved them well enough that identification was eventually possible through documents found with them. The crates Stirling had prepared were also found, though someone had ransacked them. Most specimens were missing, but fragments remained, enough to confirm Stirling's documented discoveries weren't fabrications. The photographic plates were gone, possibly deliberately destroyed. Stirling's main journals survived, perhaps by chance, perhaps because whoever had found the site first hadn't recognized their significance. The federal government's response to the 1960 discovery was swift and comprehensive. The area was declared off-limits, initially claimed as a military testing ground, later reclassified as protected wilderness, where access required permits that were never granted. The expedition's remains were reburied with little ceremony, and requests from descendants to examine materials or visit the site were denied. Academic institutions that received preliminary reports about the 1960 discovery showed remarkably little interest. The Smithsonian, in particular, claimed no knowledge of Stirling's original reports and expressed skepticism about the 1960 findings. Articles written by researchers involved in the 1960 discovery were rejected by major journals or published in obscure venues where they attracted minimal attention. Most tellingly, the crates that had been partially preserved vanished between the 1960 discovery and attempted follow-up research in the 1970s. Official records claimed they'd been transferred to federal storage facilities, but subsequent searches found no trace. It appeared that evidence had been deliberately disappeared to prevent further investigation. Among Stirling's most controversial observations were notes suggesting the Nevada giants showed physical characteristics more common in European than Asian-descended populations. The red hair Margaret Sullivan had found, the cranial features Stirling documented, and certain artifact styles seemed to match Old World rather than New World cultural traditions. Modern researchers investigating Stirling's legacy have noted similarities between the Nevada discoveries and scattered archaeological evidence from Europe. Skeletal remains of unusual height have been reported from Viking-era burials, Bronze Age sites in the Caucasus region, and mysterious Neolithic tombs in the British Isles. While mainstream archaeology dismisses suggestions of transatlantic contact before Columbus, the pattern of evidence suggests either remarkable coincidence or connections that conventional chronology doesn't accommodate. The burial practices Stirling documented showed intriguing parallels to Old World traditions. The orientation of bodies toward the south, the inclusion of valuable grave goods, the use of stone coffins, all find counterparts in ancient European burial customs. The astronomical knowledge reflected in the burial ground's organization matches sophistication found in megalithic cultures of Western Europe. Most provocatively, some artifacts Sterling documented included items that shouldn't exist in pre-Columbian America, according to conventional understanding. He described coins or medallions bearing symbols that weren't Native American, but resembled ancient European or Mediterranean designs. While skeptics argue these might have been later additions or Sterling's misidentifications, the consistency of his descriptions across multiple observations suggests he saw something genuinely anomalous. The red hair phenomenon particularly intrigues researchers. While most Native American populations have black or dark brown hair, reports of red-haired populations appear in various indigenous traditions across the Americas. The Paiute people of Nevada preserve stories about red-haired giants who inhabited the region before current tribes arrived. Similar accounts appear in traditions from Peru, the Pacific Northwest, and other regions. That analysis has revealed that some ancient American populations carried genetic variants associated with lighter hair and skin tones, inherited from ancient Siberian populations that contributed to Native American ancestry. But the Nevada giant's hair, based on Sullivan's description and preserved fragments eventually analyzed, showed characteristics more typical of European populations, suggesting either a separate origin or very ancient admixture, predating recognized contact between Old and New World populations. The metallurgical evidence adds another dimension to the mystery. The bronze and gold artifacts Sterling documented suggest knowledge of alloying and metalworking that appeared in the Old World thousands of years before it's supposed to have developed independently in the Americas. While pre-Columbian American peoples did work copper and develop metallurgy independently, the specific alloy compositions and working techniques Sterling described match Old World traditions more closely than New World methods. Stoneworking technology revealed in the structures Sterling found also shows parallels to European megalithic architecture. The fitted stone blocks, the astronomical alignments, and the engineering sophistication match techniques found at sites like Stonehenge or the Orkney Islands far more than they match anything attributed to pre-Columbian American cultures. This similarity suggests either independent development of similar solutions to similar engineering challenges or transmission of knowledge across the Atlantic. Sterling's later journal entries, written as his expedition's situation deteriorated, included increasingly strange observations that modern researchers struggle to interpret. Were these accurate records of genuine phenomena, or were they products of minds stressed by isolation, fear, and possibly malnutrition affecting cognitive function? Several entries described unusual lights visible in the burial valley at night, blue-white luminescence that didn't match firelight or any natural phenomenon Sterling knew. He attempted scientific observation, noting that the lights appeared to emanate from the ground itself, clustered around certain burial locations. They were visible from distance but dissipated when approached, making detailed study impossible. Modern researchers familiar with the location note that certain minerals in Nevada's geology can produce luminescence under specific conditions. Uranium-bearing minerals, when exposed to moisture or certain wavelengths of light, create fluorescence that might match Sterling's descriptions. Whether this explains what the expedition saw remains debatable, but it provides a possible non-supernatural explanation. Local indigenous traditions describe the area as spiritually powerful. Paiute accounts speak of guardians who protect sacred sites, manifesting as lights, sounds, or other phenomena that discourage intrusion. Whether these traditions represent genuine encounters with unusual natural phenomena or serve as cultural mechanisms to protect important sites from disturbance, they align remarkably well with Sterling's observations. The acoustic anomalies Sterling documented are particularly intriguing. He described sounds, low-frequency resonances, that seemed to emanate from deep within the canyon walls. The sounds reportedly caused physical effects, including disorientation, anxiety, and the sensation of pressure in the chest. Modern understanding of infrasound, sound below normal human hearing range, shows that such frequencies can indeed cause these physiological effects. Natural geological processes can generate infrasound under certain conditions, potentially explaining what the expedition experienced. Sterling noted that watches and compasses behaved erratically in specific locations within the canyon system. Modern geological surveys have confirmed unusual magnetic properties in the area, with local anomalies that can affect compass readings and potentially interfere with mechanical watches through magnetic fields affecting metal components. What Sterling interpreted as supernatural might have been unusual but natural geological conditions. More difficult to explain were the reported disappearances of team members. Even accounting for accidents, falls, and exposure, the pattern seemed statistically unlikely. Of the original 8-person expedition, 7 bodies were eventually found arranged in a circle. The 8th member's remains were never located, despite the relatively small area where the circle was discovered, suggesting everyone had been together at the end. The most mysterious aspect involves the expedition's apparent inability to find their exit route, despite Montgomery's expertise. Modern researchers have proposed that magnetic anomalies might have made compass navigation impossible, forcing the team to rely on visual landmarks that could be confusing in complex canyon systems where many passages look similar. Dehydration and exhaustion could have impaired judgment, turning what should have been a navigable exit into a confusing maze. The gold coins found on several of the giant skeletons sparked their own mythology. Local treasure hunters, learning of the discovery, claimed the gold was cursed, bringing misfortune to anyone who disturbed it. Several individuals who allegedly took gold pieces from the site before federal restrictions were imposed reportedly experienced runs of bad luck, feeding beliefs in a curse. Skeptics note that people seeking patterns will find them, and confirmation bias makes negative events seem more significant when they fit expected narratives. Modern DNA analysis conducted on bone fragments from both the Giants and the Sterling expedition has provided scientific answers to questions that have fueled speculation for over a century. The analysis, performed by multiple independent laboratories to ensure accuracy, yielded results that both clarified and complicated the mystery. The giant skeleton's DNA showed a mixture of ancestry, tracing to ancient populations from the Caucasus region, Northern Europe, and surprisingly, Denisovan genetic contributions. Denisovans were archaic humans who interbred with modern humans in Asia tens of thousands of years ago. The Nevada giants showed Denisovan ancestry percentages far exceeding typical modern populations, suggesting they descended from a group that had maintained higher archaic genetic heritage through isolation. Critically, the DNA confirmed these weren't Native Americans in the conventional sense. Their genetic profile didn't match typical Native American ancestry patterns. Instead, they showed affinities to ancient populations from Eurasia, suggesting either a separate migration into the Americas or descent from very early populations that diverged before typical Native American genetic patterns became established. The cranial capacity measurements Sterling had documented were confirmed. These individuals had larger brain volumes than modern humans on average, potentially correlating with their larger overall body size. Whether this translated to different cognitive capabilities remains unknown, and perhaps unknowable, but it demonstrates significant physical differences from typical human populations. The most controversial aspect of the DNA analysis has been determining whether results have been reported accurately and completely. Some researchers claim that certain findings have been suppressed because they don't fit comfortable narratives about human migration and American prehistory. Professor Silas Sterling's fate became clear through examination of his final journal and the positioned bodies. The expedition, unable to find their exit route and depleted of supplies, had made a collective decision to die together rather than separately. They arranged themselves in a circle, facing each other, and apparently waited for death from dehydration and exposure. Sterling's final journal entry, written in what appeared to be his own blood when ink ran out, expressed no regret for the expedition. He wrote that they'd made discoveries that would eventually change how humanity understood its past, even if those discoveries were suppressed initially. He expressed hope that future generations would find the truth and have the courage to accept it. The Nevada Canyon region remains closed to public access, officially due to environmental sensitivity and dangers of the terrain. The exact location of Stirling's discoveries has been removed from modern maps. Researchers requesting access are uniformly denied, with no official explanation provided. The lesson Stirling's story teaches is that history is written by those with power to control narratives. What we know about the past represents what powerful institutions allow us to know. Evidence that doesn't fit approved narratives gets suppressed, explained away, or simply disappeared. The spirits of the Stirling expedition deserve remembrance. 8 people who risked everything pursuing truth and paid the ultimate price. Their sacrifice reminds us that some knowledge comes at terrible cost, and that courage means pursuing truth even when it leads to dangerous places. The final question for listeners: do you believe there was another human lineage that once ruled this earth, only to be erased by time, catastrophe, and those who feared what their existence might reveal?